The message reached Earth 36 hours before the pirate deadline. It arrived in the middle of the night, Earth Standard Time, but that did not matter. Within minutes it was everywhere. Social media exploded. News networks interrupted their regular programming. Government offices that had been quiet suddenly blazed with light as officials were called back to work. Admiral Heejin Park was in her apartment when her communicator went off. She had been trying to sleep, but sleep was rare these days. As head of the United Human Defense Fleet, she carried the weight of humanity's safety on her shoulders. The message on her screen made sleep impossible anyway. She read it 3 times, her jaw tightening with each pass. Then she called her staff. By the time the sun rose over the Defense Council headquarters, every senior officer in the fleet was present. The main briefing room was packed. Commander Ji-won Baek, the intelligence officer, brought up the full details on the main screen. There was Dae-ho Kim's file, born in Seoul, former merchant marine, owner-operator of a small cargo vessel. Clean record, no military service but high marks in the civilian defense training that all ship captains received. Next came the Varathian siblings, Tavrin and Kelsor, refugees from a corporate dispute on their home world running a small business on Kepler 9. No criminal history. Just ordinary people trying to live their lives. Then the pirates. The Hakor clan had a long file. Raids, kidnapping, slave trading, weapons smuggling. They were brutal and had avoided serious consequences because they operated in neutral space, where no single government had authority. 12 warships was a significant force for a pirate clan. They wanted to make a statement. Admiral Park looked around the room. She saw anger on every face. Good. Anger could be useful if directed properly. She asked for options. The room erupted in discussion. Some argued for diplomatic action. Contact the Galactic Council. Demand they intervene. Others pointed out that the Council had never cared about humans before. They saw humanity as newcomers who had not earned respect yet. Why would they help now? Some suggested a covert operation. Send special forces to extract Dae-ho and the Varathians. But Kepler 9 was 3 weeks away at maximum speed. The deadline was in 34 hours. There was no time. Then someone suggested doing nothing. It was harsh but realistic. One merchant captain in exchange for avoiding an interstellar incident. Dae-ho had known the risks when he entered neutral space. Sometimes people had to accept losses. The room went silent. Admiral Park stood up slowly. Her voice was quiet, but it carried to every corner of the room. She said she understood the logical argument. She really did. But if humanity started calculating which of their own were worth saving and which were not, they had already lost something more important than any strategic advantage. Dae-ho Kim had saved 2 innocent beings from slavery or worse. He did it knowing the risks. He did it because it was right. And now humanity would show the galaxy what happened when someone threatened one of their own. She called for a vote on deploying the Third Fleet. The vote was unanimous. Ambassador Minho Song was already at the Galactic Council chambers when the deployment order came through. He had arrived hours earlier, demanding an emergency session. The council met in a vast circular chamber that could hold representatives from over 300 species. Today, only the core members were present, 23 species that formed the council's leadership. Council Prime Belshara, an ancient being whose species had been traveling space for thousands of years, listened to Ambassador Song's petition with what appeared to be patience. When Song finished, she spoke. Her voice was like wind through crystal, beautiful and cold. She said the council sympathized with humanity's position. However, Kepler 9 was in neutral space. The incident involved a human who chose to enter that space knowing the risks. The pirates, while unpleasant, were not violating any council laws. There was nothing to be done. Ambassador Song kept his temper under control. He asked if the council would feel the same way if it was one of their own citizens. Would they still claim there was nothing to be done? Another council member, representing a species that looked like floating jellyfish, spoke up. He said that most civilized species understood there were places where protection did not extend. Neutral space was dangerous by definition. Rational beings accepted this and planned accordingly. Sacrificing one individual to save many was simply logical. Ambassador Song smiled, but there was no humor in it. He thanked the council for clarifying their position. He said humanity would handle the situation themselves. The council need not worry. As he left the chamber, he heard the council members discussing humanity behind him. They were curious about what the humans would do. Some bet that humanity would fold, unable to project power so far from their home systems. Others thought the humans might try a small rescue operation that would fail. It would be an interesting test of this young species. Meanwhile, across human space, something extraordinary was happening. The Third Fleet was indeed deploying. 43 warships, the pride of the human defense forces, were preparing for immediate departure. But they would not be going alone. President Yuna Choi had addressed the public directly. She explained the situation clearly. A human citizen had helped innocent beings and was now facing punishment for his heroism. The government was sending the fleet, but this was about more than military force. This was about who humanity was as a species. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Merchant captains changed their routes, heading toward Kepler 9. They were not military vessels, but they had engines, and they had heart. Colonial defense forces, small groups of ships that protected distant human settlements, began converging on the coordinates. Even private yacht owners, people with no combat experience, started plotting courses. Captain Sang-hoon, Lee commanded an independent freighter called the Morning Star. He was hauling agricultural equipment to a colony world when he heard about Daeho. He immediately diverted course. His crew did not argue. They understood. When the call came, you answered. That was what it meant to be human. On dozens of worlds and hundreds of ships, humans made the same decision. They would go to Kepler 9. They might not have weapons. They might not be able to fight. But they would be there. Their presence would say something important. You do not touch one of ours. You do not punish people for doing the right thing. Not while humans can still draw breath and fly ships. The news spread beyond human space. Other species watched with confusion and growing fascination. The humans were mobilizing a fleet for one merchant captain. They were risking an incident with a pirate clan that might escalate into wider conflicts. They were doing this not for strategic gain or territorial expansion, but for principle. In the Galactic Council chambers, Council Prime Velshara received reports of the human fleet movements. She studied them carefully. This was unexpected. Most species would have negotiated, perhaps paid a ransom quietly or simply accepted the loss. But the humans were doing something different. They were making a statement. She wondered if humanity understood the implications. They were revealing their military strength, their logistical capabilities, and their willingness to project force far from home. Any species watching would learn valuable intelligence. But perhaps the humans did understand and simply did not care. Perhaps they wanted the galaxy to know exactly what they were capable of. Admiral Park stood on the bridge of her flagship, the Soul. Around her, the Third Fleet moved in perfect formation. Behind them, scattered across several light years of space, came the civilians. Hundreds of ships all heading to the same place, all answering the same call. The journey would take time, even at maximum speed. But they were coming. The pirates would see them arrive. The station would see them arrive. And most importantly, Captain Daeho Kim would see them arrive. He would see that humanity had not forgotten him. He would see that his choice to help strangers mattered. He would see that he was not alone, and the galaxy would learn a new truth. You could threaten humanity. You could challenge them. You could even fight them, but you could not make them abandon their own. That simply was not who they were. 3 weeks had passed since the attack on Kepler 9. Daeho sat in the station's repair bay, watching technicians work on the Songbird. The damage had been worse than he first thought. The engine needed a complete rebuild and half the hull plating had to be replaced. The repairs were expensive, eating through most of his savings, but he was not alone. Tavern and Kelsor came to the repair bay every day. They brought their tools and worked alongside the station technicians. The Varathian siblings insisted they owed Daeho a debt that could never truly be repaid, but they would try. Their skilled hands made the work go faster, and they refused any payment. Daeho's injuries were healing too. The blast that had grazed his side during their escape left a nasty burn, but the station doctor said he would be fine. He had been lucky. A few inches to the left and the story would have ended very differently. Life on Kepler 9 had returned to normal, or so it seemed. The markets were open again. Ships came and went. Station security had been reinforced, and everyone said the pirate attack was an isolated incident. But Daeho noticed things. The way some merchants looked at him with a mixture of respect and unease. The way conversation stopped when he entered a room. He was the human who had fought back. Most species did not do that. When pirates came, you gave them what they wanted and hoped they left. Fighting only made things worse. That was the accepted wisdom of the galaxy. But Daiho had not followed those rules, and it made people uncomfortable. On the 22nd day, everything changed. Daiho was in the Songbird's engine room with Kelsor when the alarm started. These were not the usual docking alerts or system tests. These were emergency alarms, the kind that meant real danger. His communicator erupted with messages. Station security was calling everyone to shelter. Daiho and Kelsor rushed to the Songbird's bridge and activated the external sensors. What they saw made Daiho's blood run cold. 12 ships had appeared at the edge of sensor range. They were big military-grade vessels bristling with weapons. Hakor pirate ships, all of them bearing the same clan markings. They had come in force and they were heading straight for Kepler 9. A transmission came through on the station-wide channel. The voice was harsh and angry. Daiho recognized it from the attack 3 weeks ago. Graltok, the pirate commander he had shot. The translator worked through the alien speech, converting it into words Daiho could understand. Graltok's message was simple and brutal. The station had 1 hour to surrender the human captain called Daiho Kim and the 2 Varathian merchants called Tavern and Kelsor. If the station complied, the pirates would leave peacefully. If not, they would take what they wanted by force and leave the station a burning wreck. The transmission ended. Silence filled the Songbird's bridge. Kelsor turned to Daiho, his mandibles clicking in distress. This was because of them. The pirates had come back for revenge, and now the entire station was at risk. Daiho tried to think. The Songbird was still not flight-ready. Even if she was, running would only delay the inevitable. Graltok would hunt them across the galaxy if he had to, and the station with thousands of innocent people would burn. Tavran arrived at the ship minutes later, moving faster than Daiho had ever seen a Varathian move. He was carrying a data pad, and his shell was flickering with colors that the translator said meant extreme urgency. He had done something, he said. Something that might help. He had sent a message to human space. The message explained everything. What Daiho had done, how he had saved them, and how now he faced capture or death because of it. Tavran had sent it to every human channel he could find. Government offices, military stations, news networks, even social media platforms. He did not know if it would help, but he had to try. Daiho put a hand on Tavran's shell. A gesture he had learned meant comfort to Varathians. It was a good try, he said, but help would not come in time. Human space was weeks away, even at the fastest speeds. They had less than an hour. Another transmission came through. This one was internal, from the station administrator's office. All residents were ordered to report to the central auditorium for an emergency meeting. Daiho, Tavran, and Kelsor looked at each other. They knew what this meeting would be about. The auditorium was packed. Thousands of beings from dozens of species crowded together, their fear thick in the air. Station Administrator Quixnell stood on the central platform. He was a planarian, a species known for their administrative skills and, unfortunately, their tendency to avoid conflict at any cost. Quixnell's voice was shaky as he explained the situation. 12 pirate warships surrounded the station. Station security consisted of 6 patrol craft, suitable for handling drunk merchants and small disputes, not military engagements. Kepler 9 had no defenses that could stop a fleet like this. If they fought, everyone would die. The solution, Quixnell said, was obvious. They had to give the pirates what they wanted. 3 lives in exchange for thousands. It was a simple calculation, one that any rational being would understand. He called for a vote. The crowd murmured, uncomfortable but largely in agreement. Daiho stood up. Heads turned toward him. He made his way to the platform, and Quixnell reluctantly stepped aside. Daiho looked out at the crowd. So many different faces, different species, all united in their fear. He told them he understood. He really did. They had families, businesses, lives they wanted to protect. He did not blame them for being afraid. He would surrender himself to the pirates. But he asked them to let Tavran and Kelsor go. The Varathians had done nothing wrong. They should not have to pay for his actions. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Some looked away. Others nodded, seemingly relieved that at least one of the targets was being reasonable. Quixnell started to speak, probably to accept Daiho's offer, but Tavran's voice cut through the auditorium. The Varathian siblings pushed their way to the platform. They stood beside Daiho, their shells bright with colors that meant defiance and loyalty. Tavran spoke clearly, and the translator carried his words to every being in the room. If Deho went, they went. They would not let their friend face this alone. They refused. Kelsor added that humans had a saying, "No one gets left behind." The Varathians were adopting this saying. They would stand with Deho no matter what happened. The crowd erupted in arguments. Some praised the Varathians' loyalty. Others called them fools. Quixnell tried to restore order, insisting that all three had to be handed over anyway. The pirates had demanded it, and they could not risk refusing. A merchant from a species Deho did not recognize stood up. He asked what would stop the pirates from coming back again. If they gave in this time, Kepler 9 would be marked as an easy target. Every pirate clan in the sector would know they could make demands and the station would fold. Quixnell stammered. That was a problem for another day. Right now they needed to survive. He called for station security to take Deho and the Varathians into custody. For their own protection, he said, though everyone knew what he really meant. Security officers approached the platform. They looked apologetic but determined. One of them, a being that resembled an earth bear but with 6 eyes, put a restraining device on Deho's wrist. It clicked into place, cold and heavy. Deho did not resist. Fighting would only make things worse. He looked at Tavrin and Kelsor as they too were restrained. The Varathians' shells had turned a deep blue color. The translator did not provide an emotion for that color, but Deho thought it looked like sadness. They were led out of the auditorium and toward the security station. The crowd watched in silence. Some looked relieved. Others looked ashamed. A few looked angry, but none of them spoke up. As they walked through the corridors, Deho thought about his grandmother again. She would have been disappointed in this moment, not in him but in all these people who chose the easy path. But she also taught him that you could not control what others did. You could only control yourself, and you had to live with your choices. He had chosen to help 2 strangers. He would make the same choice again. If this was the price, he would pay it. What none of them knew was that Tavrin's message had not fallen on deaf ears. Far away in human space, people were reading about Captain Deho Kim. They were reading about how he saved 2 aliens from pirates. They were reading about how he now faced capture and torture because he did the right thing. And humans, as it turned out, had very strong feelings about such things. 1 week after the fleet arrived at Kepler 9, life began to settle into a new pattern. The Third Fleet remained in the system, not as an occupying force but as a presence. Admiral Park had made it clear that the fleet would stay until diplomatic arrangements were finalized. The galaxy needed to understand that human protection was not temporary or conditional. Deho found the attention overwhelming. Everywhere he went on the station, people recognized him. Some wanted to thank him. Others wanted to simply see the human who had started everything. He tried to go about his business, overseeing the final repairs on the Songbird, but privacy had become impossible. Tavrin and Kelsor stayed close to him. The Varathian siblings had become minor celebrities themselves. They were the aliens who had triggered humanity's response, though they insisted they had merely asked for help. The distinction did not matter to most people. They were now forever linked to one of the most significant events in recent galactic history. The Galactic Council called an emergency session. Ambassador Minho Song returned to the Great Circular Chamber, but this time the atmosphere was different. Before, he had been a petitioner. Now he walked in with the weight of a fleet behind him. The council members watched him with new eyes, respect mixed with wariness. Council Prime Vel Shara opened the session by acknowledging the human military response to the Kepler 9 incident. She noted that humanity had resolved the situation without bloodshed, which showed admirable restraint. However, she expressed concern about the precedent. If every species deployed fleets for individual citizens, neutral space would become a battleground. Ambassador Song stood to respond. His voice was calm but firm. He reminded the council that they had refused to intervene when asked. They had called the situation a local matter and suggested that sacrificing individuals for the greater good was simply logical. Humanity rejected that logic. He explained that humans believed every individual had value. Every person mattered. When one of their own was threatened, especially for doing something heroic, humanity would respond. This was not aggression. This was protection, and it extended beyond just humans. Anyone who stood with humanity against injustice could expect humanity to stand with them. The council chamber erupted in discussion. Some members argued that this was dangerously naive. Others suggested it might be a cover for expansionist ambitions. A few remained silent, clearly calculating what this meant for their own interests. One representative from a small species that had suffered pirate attacks for decades stood up. He asked if Ambassador Song meant what he said. Would humanity really protect other species, even if there was no strategic benefit? Song met his eyes directly. Yes. If a species stood against injustice, if they helped humans or worked toward mutual security, humanity would be there. That was the promise. That was the offer on the table. The chamber fell silent. This was unprecedented. Major powers did not offer protection without demanding something substantial in return. Territory, resources, political allegiance. But the human ambassador seemed to be offering something different. Partnership based on shared values rather than calculated advantage. Council Prime Velshara studied Ambassador Song for a long moment. She was old, far older than any human, and had seen countless species rise and fall. She recognized something in humanity that reminded her of the ancient days when her own people were young. Idealism backed by strength. It was either the foundation of greatness or the path to disaster. Back on Kepler 9, formal negotiations were taking place in the station administrator's office. Admiral Park sat across from Tavren and Kelsor, with Ambassador Song participating via holographic link. The Varathian siblings had requested this meeting, and what they proposed surprised everyone. They wanted to form an alliance. Not a trade agreement or a non-aggression pact, but a true alliance. Mutual defense, cultural exchange, joint infrastructure projects. They wanted their species to be bound to humanity in a way that would last generations. Admiral Park asked why. The Varathians were a small species with limited military power. What did they think they could offer humanity? Tavren's mandibles clicked in what the translator rendered as determination. They could offer loyalty. They could offer technical expertise. They could offer friendship with a species that understood what it meant to stand by your principles. And most importantly, they could offer trust. The Varathians would trust humanity because humanity had already proven themselves worthy of that trust. Kelsor added that the galaxy was full of species who made alliances based on fear or greed. The Varathians wanted to be part of something different. They wanted to be part of something built on the kind of values that made a merchant captain risk his life for strangers. The alliance was formalized 3 days later. It was a small ceremony, nothing like the grand diplomatic events usually associated with interstellar treaties. Just a few humans, 2 Varathians, and representatives from a handful of other species who were curious about what was happening. But the news spread quickly. Humanity had gained its first formal alien ally. Other species began reaching out. Some were small civilizations looking for protection. Others were mid-sized powers interested in the economic and technological benefits of partnering with this emerging force. All of them had heard the story of Kepler 9 and understood what it meant. Deho watched all of this unfold with a sense of unreality. He was just a merchant captain. He had helped 2 people because it was the right thing to do. How had that led to fleets and alliances and galactic politics? Admiral Park came to see him before the fleet departed. She found him in a quiet corner of the station, looking out at the stars. She stood beside him silently for a moment before speaking. She told him that what he did mattered, not just because it saved Tavren and Kelsor, though that was important. It mattered because it reminded humanity of who they were. In the years since joining the galactic community, humans had sometimes struggled with their identity. Were they conquerors? Traders? Explorers? They had tried to fit into existing frameworks, to play by established rules. But Deho's actions showed that humanity did not need to fit into anyone else's framework. They could create their own. Humans helped those in need. Humans stood by their principles even when it cost them. Humans protected their own and extended that protection to those who shared their values. That was the framework. That was the path forward. Deho smiled slightly. He said he was just trying not to get killed by pirates. The Admiral laughed. Maybe so. But sometimes the smallest actions had the biggest consequences. His grandmother would be proud. The Third Fleet departed Kepler 9 eventually, though they left behind a small diplomatic mission and a promise to return if needed. The civilian ships that had come to stand with Deho went back to their regular routes, their crews carrying stories that would be told for years. As for Graltok and the Hakor pirates, they learned their lesson well. Word spread among the pirate clans about what happened when you threatened a human. The Hakor clan fractured soon after, with many members abandoning Greltok's leadership. He himself was eventually captured by his own people and turned over to authorities. The pirates wanted no part of humanity's attention. Life on Kepler 9 changed too. The station became a hub for human-alien cooperation. More humans came, bringing trade and technology. More aliens came, curious about these strange beings who valued individuals over calculations. The market where Tavren and Kelsor had their shop became known as Heroes Market, though the Varathians insisted they were not heroes. Months later, Tiho finally got the Songbird fully repaired and ready to fly. He stood in the cargo bay, running through pre-flight checks when Tavren and Kelsor arrived. They had gifts, new navigation software they had developed specifically for the Songbird, enhanced sensors, a communication system that would keep them connected no matter where Deho traveled. Deho thanked them. He asked if they would join him on his next trip. The Varathians agreed immediately. Their shop was successful enough now that they could hire others to manage it. They wanted to see the galaxy with their friend. They wanted to see what other places needed help. On the day the Songbird left Kepler 9, dozens of ships formed an honor guard. Humans and aliens alike, they escorted the small cargo vessel to the edge of the system. Some ships fired their engines in salute. Others broadcast messages of friendship and gratitude. Deho guided his ship into faster-than-light travel, leaving Kepler 9 behind. But the lessons of that place traveled with him. The galaxy had learned that humans would protect their own. They would stand with those who stood with them. They would answer injustice with overwhelming force, but they would also extend friendship to anyone who shared their values. As the Songbird traveled through the void, Deho thought about the future. Humanity was still young in galactic terms. There would be challenges ahead, conflicts and misunderstandings. But the foundation had been set, not through conquest or cunning, but through simple acts of compassion backed by unshakable resolve. In the end, the lesson was simple. Help one human and you gain humanity's friendship. Harm one human and you face humanity's wrath. Stand with humans against injustice and they will stand with you against anything. That was the promise. That was the truth. And the galaxy would never forget it. The deadline came with the cold precision of mathematics. Greltok sat in his command chair, watching the chronometer count down. Around his flagship, 11 other Hakor warships held position. The station floated before them, helpless and silent. In another hour, his patience would end and the attack would begin. He was pleased. The station had already signaled its surrender. The human and the two Varathians were in custody, ready for transfer. Greltok planned to make an example of them, something that would be remembered across this entire sector. No one humiliated the Hakor clan and lived to speak of it. His sensor officer made a surprised sound. A ship had just appeared at the edge of detection range, then another, and another. Within minutes, dozens of contacts filled the screen. They were coming from the direction of human space. Greltok studied the readings. Most were civilian vessels, freighters, passenger ships, even private yachts. They were spreading out, positioning themselves between his fleet and the station. It made no tactical sense. Civilian ships had no business in a military confrontation. He ordered his communications officer to hail them and demand they leave the area. The first ship to respond was a battered freighter called the Morning Star. Its captain, who identified himself as Sang-Hoon Lee, politely declined to leave. He said he was there to ensure the safety of a fellow human and his friends. Other civilian ships echoed the same message. They were not leaving. Inside Kepler 9, Deho sat in the security detention cell with Tavren and Kelsor. They had been given access to the station feeds, perhaps as a mercy or perhaps as a cruelty. They could see the pirate ships waiting outside. They could see the countdown to their scheduled transfer. When the first civilian ships appeared, Kelsor made a confused clicking sound. Why were human ships coming? Deho did not have an answer. He recognized some of the ship classes. Independent merchants, colonial transports. They were not military. They could not fight 12 warships. Coming here was suicide. Tavren's shell shifted to a color that meant hope mixed with fear. More ships kept arriving. Dozens became hundreds. They formed a loose perimeter around the station, their presence a statement even if their weapons were minimal. Then everything changed. The station's long-range sensors detected a massive energy signature approaching. It was big, far bigger than the civilian ships. The display showed formation markers. Military vessels, lots of them, moving in perfect coordination. The Third Fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel in a display of precision that made even the station's jaded traffic controllers stop and stare. 43 warships, ranging from nimble destroyers to massive battlecruisers, took up positions around Kepler 9. At the center of the formation was the Soul, Admiral Park's flagship, its hull gleaming under the distant starlight. On the Hakor flagship, alarm systems screamed warnings. Graltok's tactical officer was shouting numbers. 43 contacts, all military grade, all carrying weapon systems that made their own arsenal look like toys. The human fleet was not just larger. It was more advanced, better organized, and clearly ready for combat. Graltok felt something unfamiliar crawling up his spine. Fear. His 12 ships had seemed so powerful when threatening a civilian station. Against this fleet, they were nothing. He tried to maintain composure, telling himself this had to be a bluff. No species deployed this much force for one merchant captain. A transmission came through on all channels. Admiral Park's face appeared on every screen in the area. Her voice was calm and professional, but there was steel underneath. She identified herself and stated her purpose clearly. The human vessels had come to ensure the safety of Captain Daeho Kim and his allies. She requested that all 3 be released immediately and all pirate vessels depart the system. Graltok snarled. He still had hostages. He still had leverage. He sent his own transmission, informing the humans that if they did not withdraw, he would attack the station. Thousands would die. Did they want that on their conscience? Admiral Park's response came immediately. Her expression did not change, but her words cut like a blade. She said that if Graltok attacked the station, the Third Fleet would ensure that not a single pirate ship left this system, not one. She would personally see to it that the Hakor clan ceased to exist as anything more than a cautionary tale. She gave him 10 minutes to decide. The transmission ended. Silence filled the Hakor flagship. Graltok's officers looked at him, waiting for orders. He stared at the tactical display. 12 ships against 43, plus hundreds of civilian vessels that might or might not be armed. Even if the civilians were unarmed, the military fleet alone could destroy him utterly. He tried to think of options. He could attack the station, but the human admiral had made it clear what would happen then. He could try to fight, but that was suicide. He could try to run, but human engines appeared to be faster than his own. They would hunt him down, all of this for one merchant captain, all of this because a human had helped 2 aliens. It made no sense by the logic of the galaxy he knew, but sense did not matter when facing overwhelming force. On Kepler 9, Station Administrator Quicksnull was having a crisis. The security feed showed the human fleet surrounding the station. Hundreds of civilian ships had put themselves in danger to protect 3 prisoners. A military fleet had crossed half the galaxy to rescue them. And here he sat, having already agreed to hand them over to pirates. He made a decision that surprised even himself. He ordered the detention cells opened. Daeho Tavrin and Kelzor were released immediately. He sent a message to Admiral Park, informing her that the individuals in question were free and under station protection. Daeho walked out of the cell in a daze. Station security officers who had arrested him now escorted him with respect, bordering on reverence. He made his way to the observation deck where large windows showed the space outside the station. What he saw took his breath away. Ships. So many ships. The great warships of the Third Fleet held perfect formation, their weapons arrays tracking the pirate vessels. Beyond them, scattered like stars, were the civilian ships. Freighters and transports, their crews watching and waiting. All of them had come for him. Tavrin and Kelzor stood beside him. The Varathian siblings had never seen anything like this. In all their experience with galactic civilization, they had never heard of a species doing something like this. One person. That was all it took. One person in danger and an entire species mobilized. Daeho's communicator buzzed. It was a direct link from the Soul. Admiral Park's face appeared on the small screen. She asked if he was all right. Daeho nodded, not trusting his voice. The Admiral smiled slightly. She said the fleet was there to bring him home. He was not to worry. Everything would be fine. The 10 minutes expired. On the Hakor flagship, Graltok made his choice. He ordered his ships to power down weapons and begin withdrawal. He sent a message to the human fleet acknowledging their authority in this matter. The Hacker clan would leave and not return. It was humiliating. It was defeat. But it was survival. As his ships turned away from Kepler-9, Graltok watched the human fleet on his screens. They did not pursue. They did not mock. They simply watched, ensuring the pirates left completely. The pirate commander understood something in that moment. He had misjudged humanity badly. He had thought them weak because they were new. He had thought them easy targets because they valued things like compassion and helping strangers. But those qualities did not make them weak. Those qualities made them dangerous in ways he had never imagined, because a species that would deploy a fleet for one merchant captain would do anything for their own. And a species that helped strangers might help anyone who needed it. The implications were vast and terrifying. Back on Kepler-9, the station erupted in celebration. The pirates were leaving. The crisis was over. Beings from dozens of species crowded the observation decks to watch the human fleet. Some cheered. Others stood in respectful silence. All of them understood they had witnessed something important. Deho received hundreds of messages, some from humans on the civilian ships checking if he was okay, others from station residents apologizing for their earlier weakness, even a few from alien species he had never met, expressing admiration for what humanity had done. Admiral Park requested permission to come aboard the station. She wanted to meet Deho in person. When she arrived, accompanied by a small security detail, she found him in the Songbird's repair bay. He was still in shock, struggling to process everything that had happened. The Admiral shook his hand. She told him that he had done humanity proud. His actions on behalf of the Varathians reflected the best of what humans could be. That was why the fleet came. That was why civilians had risked everything to stand with him. Because he represented the values they all shared. Deho finally found his voice. He asked why. Why send so much for one person? The Admiral's answer was simple. Because that one person mattered. Every human mattered. And anyone who helped humans or stood with humans against injustice could count on humanity standing with them. That was the promise. That was who they were. Across the galaxy, the news spread. Humanity had deployed a fleet to rescue a merchant captain. They had faced down pirates without firing a shot. They had shown strength, unity, and an unwavering commitment to their own. Deho Kim leaned back in the pilot seat of his cargo ship, the Songbird, and watched the massive space station grow larger on his screen. Kepler-9 was one of the biggest trading stations in neutral space. Ships from 100 different worlds came here to buy, sell, and make deals. Humans were still new to this whole galactic community thing, but Deho loved it. Every trip brought new sights and new friends. The Songbird was small compared to the huge freighters that dominated the station docks. She was old too, with patches on her hull and systems that needed constant maintenance. But she was his, and she had never let him down. Deho guided her into docking bay 17 and felt the familiar thunk as the magnetic clamps locked into place. His crew of 3 helped him unload the cargo containers. Medical supplies for the station's hospital wing, manufactured goods from Earth, and a special order of coffee beans that apparently only grew on his home planet. The station's cargo handlers, a mix of different alien species, moved the containers with practiced efficiency. After the unloading was complete, Deho decided to walk through the market section. He needed to find a replacement part for the Songbird's navigation computer, and the market was the best place to find anything. The corridors of Kepler-9 were wide and bright, filled with beings of all shapes and sizes. Some walked on 2 legs like him, others on 4 or 6. Some floated, and a few rolled along on circular bodies. The market was loud and busy. Vendors called out their goods in a dozen languages. The station's translation system worked overtime, converting the calls into something Deho could understand. He passed shops selling strange fruits, advanced technology, and weapons that made him nervous just looking at them. That was when he met them. 2 insectoid beings, each about his height with 4 arms and shimmering blue-green shells. They ran a small electronics shop tucked between 2 larger stores. Their sign advertised ship parts and repairs. Deho approached, and one of them turned to greet him. The translation came through clearly. The being introduced himself as Tavren, and his sibling was Kelzor. They were Varathians, a peaceful species known for their technical skills. Daiho explained what he needed, and Tavren's mandibles clicked in what the translator said was pleasure. They had exactly the part he needed, and for a fair price too. While Tavren searched the back room for the part, Daiho chatted with Kelzor. The Varathian was curious about Earth and asked many questions. Daiho was happy to answer. He was explaining what an ocean was when the lights flickered. It started as just a brief dimming, but then the lights went out completely. Emergency lighting kicked in after a few seconds, bathing everything in a red glow. Kelzor made a worried sound. Power fluctuations were rare on Kepler 9. The station's reactors were supposed to be the most reliable in this sector. Then Daiho heard the screaming. It came from deeper in the market. People were running, pushing past each other in panic. Daiho's hand instinctively went to his side, where he kept a small plasma pistol. Merchant captains learned quickly that space could be dangerous. A group of beings burst into view. They were big, nearly 7 feet tall, with gray, scaly skin and too many teeth. Each carried weapons that looked military-grade. Pirates. Daiho recognized them from the security briefings he always read before docking at a new station. Hakor Raiders, one of the most brutal pirate clans in this region. There were 6 of them in this corridor alone. They were grabbing people, checking them, and throwing them aside. They seemed to be looking for something specific. Station security was nowhere to be seen. The pirates must have disabled the security systems when they cut the power. One of the pirates spotted the Varathian shop. His eyes, cold and calculating, fixed on Kelzor. He shouted something and the other pirates turned. Kelzor backed away, but there was nowhere to go. The pirates advanced, weapons raised. Daiho's mind raced. He was one person with a pistol designed for small-scale defense. The pirates had military weapons and armor. The smart thing to do was hide, let them take what they wanted, and hope they left quickly. That was what everyone else was doing. The market had emptied in seconds. But Daiho thought about his grandmother. She had survived Earth's unification wars and always told him the same thing. When you see someone who needs help, you help them. Period. No calculations, no wondering if it's worth it. You just do what's right. He stepped forward, putting himself between the pirates and Kelzor. His pistol was in his hand, pointed at the lead pirate. His voice was steady despite the fear in his chest. The lead pirate, who wore more decorations than the others, laughed. The translator made it sound harsh and cruel. This must be their commander. He said something about humans being stupid, about not understanding how things worked out here in space. He raised his weapon toward Daiho. Daiho fired first. His shot hit the pirate commander in the shoulder, spinning him around. It was not a killing shot, but it was enough. The other pirates hesitated, surprised that anyone had actually fought back. In that moment of hesitation, Daiho grabbed Kelzor and pulled him toward the back of the shop. Tavren appeared from the back room, his forearms full of tools that clattered to the floor when he saw what was happening. Daiho shouted for them to follow him. He knew these markets. There were service corridors, maintenance tunnels, ways to move through the station that most people never saw. The pirates opened fire. Energy bolts scorched the air where Daiho had been standing. He and the Varathians ran through the back room and out into a narrow service corridor. Behind them, they could hear the pirates following, shouting in anger. Daiho's communicator buzzed. His crew was calling. They had seen the pirates and were already preparing the Songbird for immediate departure. Good. He needed his ship if they were going to survive this. They ran through the maze of corridors. The Varathians were fast despite their size. Daiho led them through 3 different levels, always moving toward the docking bays. The pirates were persistent, but they did not know the station layout as well as he did. He had studied the maps during every docking, partly out of curiosity and partly because he believed in being prepared. Finally, they burst onto Docking Bay 17. The Songbird was there, her airlock open and ramp extended. Daiho's crew waved frantically from the entrance. They ran up the ramp just as the pirates appeared at the far end of the bay. The Songbird lifted off before the airlock was fully closed. Daiho threw himself into the pilot seat and fired the engines. The ship lurched forward, scraping against the docking bay wall as he pushed her too hard too fast. Alarms screamed, but they were moving. The pirates fired at them. Energy weapons lit up the bay. One shot hit the Songbird's rear shield, causing it to flare and fail. Another hit the engine cowling. Daiho gritted his teeth and flew like his life depended on it, because it did. They cleared the station. Daiho put everything the Songbird had into her engines, pushing her away from Kepler 9. The pirate ships at the station did not pursue. They had apparently gotten what they came for from other parts of the station and did not want to waste time on one small cargo ship. Once they were clear, Daiho finally let himself breathe. He looked back at the Varathian siblings. Tavrin and Kelsor were huddled together, their shells still shimmering but with a dull quality that suggested fear or stress. Kelsor spoke through, the translator, his voice filled with confusion and gratitude. Why did Daiho help them? He did not know them. He had risked his life, his ship, his crew for strangers. Most species would never do such a thing. Daiho shrugged. It was the right thing to do, he said simply. You do not leave people behind. You do not let bad things happen when you can stop them. That was just how humans were. The Varathians looked at each other. Then Tavren said something that the translator rendered as a formal oath of friendship. Whatever humans needed, wherever they were, the Varathians would remember this day. Daiho smiled and turned back to his controls. The Songbird was damaged but functional. They would need repairs, but they were alive. He had made new friends today. In his mind, that made it a good day, despite everything. What Daiho did not know was that the pirate commander, Greltok, was not the kind to forget an insult. And being shot by a human, losing his targets because of a human, was an insult that burned. In the dark corners of Kepler 9, as station security finally emerged to assess the damage, Greltok swore revenge. The human would pay. They all would pay.